Okay everyone, let's do this. One more top 10 list to go, and that is gonna be on one of my most favorite superhero characters, the Amazing Spider-Man. So I hope you like this one, because this took a lot of time. As I said on my very first top 10 video, that was my top 10 favorite graphic novels. I've been collecting comic books now for almost 9 years and never really ranked them in some sort of way. And it's not like I've said that this is my top number 1, 2, 3, and 4 and so on. These are just 10 books that are some of the best Spider-Man books that I'm going to show you, in my opinion. There's no way that I could do this if I were supposed to pick out each and every one over the other. So here is my favorite Spider-Man books. And for the first one, I don't even have the copy for it anymore. I mean, the first one I was supposed to show you guys was the big time standard sized hardcover. But I sold those, along with all of the other hardcovers that was standard sized with Spider-Man. Almost. Yeah, that's just because I recently finished off my Amazing Spider-Man marathon and loved the story all the way through, of course, but I am so confident right now that Marvel will eventually release Omnibus for this Dan Slott run, as well as the brand new Day era with the Spidey Brain Trust. So here's hoping they're gonna reprint it in Omnibus format, because now the hardcover copies are gone and I have nothing to show you, but I'm confident that we'll see an Omnibus one day, and if not, I made peace with the thought that I might have to reread those issues in digital format if they never release it, but here's hoping. But the first book is Big Time from the Dan Slott era. And what I love about the Big Time era is that it reinvents Peter Parker a bit. I mean, some would say that he's not even Peter Parker anymore, and where the hell is the Parker luck, because finally some things are actually going Peter's way. And I love that, because I felt that the guy needed a break, and now we have this new job at Horizon Labs. Then we get amazing story arcs like the Spider Island event and the Ends of the Earth, which is a great Doc Ock story in my opinion. And yeah, just because stories like that, and it being the first story where Peter finally is getting a break economically. The second book I have to show you, I actually have a copy of, and that is The Amazing Spider-Man by J. Michael Strasinski. This series has been with me since even before I was into comic books, because these issues was actually reprinted in Swedish format when I was younger. And these are some of the first comics that I was exposed to when it comes to Spider-Man. And out of all of the story arcs, it was the Homecoming story arc that was reprinted when I got a hold of them. And that is still till this day my favorite storyline within this omnibus. This is a very controversial series, as it has some of the highest points as well as some of the lowest points when it comes to the Homecoming, of course being one of the highest, and then Since Past being one of the lowest. And then there's of course One More Day. So yeah, like most writers, it has its pros and cons, but the pros definitely outweighs the cons with this run. Next up, here we have The Superior Spider-Man, also by Dan Slott, and this is one of the greatest stuff he has ever written, possibly the best. And it was the very same comic that got me into reading Spider-Man in single issues, which is kind of weird because where this story stems from, with the ending in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 700, which I had not read, but there was a synopsis in the beginning of that #1 issue of Superior Spider-Man. It helped out a lot. And yeah, this is too short of a series actually, because it should have been so much longer than it really was, but with the time that it had, it sure made the best out of it, I think. And when it comes to this edition alone, I hope they do something like this with the omnibus, if there ever is gonna be one, because this wraparound cover with J. Scott Campbell's artwork on it just looks so good. And yeah, I hope we see something like that with an upcoming omnibus one day in the future. And when it comes to the story itself, it's a lot more of an anti-hero Spider-Man, a lot more edge to it, and I feel that that was refreshing for the character within this book. And yeah, here's hope for an omnibus in the future for this one. And this next book is gonna be my last one time mentioning Dan Slott, probably, but it is the Amazing Spider-Man Worldwide volumes, or his, I don't know, they revamped Spider-Man so many times, but I love this series, and this was the final volume where we get a whole new type of Peter Parker once again, even more successful now, but still being kind of a poor man's Tony Stark, with having his own company all around the world, making up these things, and Spider-Man is more or less accepted all over the world. I love the way they go with the relationship between the Green Goblin and Peter Parker within this one. Not only the Spider-Man versus Green Goblin, but the Peter Parker versus Norman Osborn aspect of it, as we see him in a lot of different iterations throughout this run. And yeah, I think those were my last words on the Dan Slott. Maybe. And of course, we cannot forget where this series actually started out from. That is, of course, the Stan Lee and Steve Ditko era. Starting off with Amazing Fantasy 15, and then going forward with its own title just a year after having publishing that. And funny enough, I know the issue of Amazing Fantasy is included within this book, but it doesn't show up on the back side. But of course we have it right here on the cover. But I like this. This is very, very classic, and Stan Lee wrote more or less every issue like it would be the first issue someone ever picked up of Spider-Man. So there's a lot of repetition going on, and explaining on his origins and powers and friends and status, but it's all okay. If you know that going into it, you appreciate it more, I think. And what I really appreciated within these runs weren't just the issues themselves, but also the very fan letters that they published within these omnibus. Letters that was like their times twittering or YouTubing, sharing their opinions on what characters should be seen more or less, and what should happen to them and such. Just going into that world, you're back in the 1960s, and all the kids that already back then had a very strong fandom into this character. And then we shouldn't forget the artwork by Steve Ditko that did so many characters that we still see today, and some of which still today also keep that very same look in one iteration or another today. So of course this is not to be neglected. This has a very good place in my top 10. And next up, do not let the cover fool you. This is the Stan Lee and John Romita era of the Amazing Spider-Man, but this is a Humberto Ramos variant cover. And why do you have the variant to say? Well, this was the very first Amazing Spider-Man omnibus that I picked up at my local comic shop, and this was what they had, and I didn't even know what a variant was at that time. And this collects the whole work of Stan Lee in collaboration with John Romita, and I actually read this before I even had read the Steve Ditko era, and didn't even bother me you can jump on pretty much any issue that Stan Lee wrote of Spider-Man. As I said, he explained all of the things in every issue. Kind of repetitive, but you get through it. And with John Romita, you get also a lot of new original characters that still has the same design today, some of them, and just as memorable, and under the same influence that I love the Steve Ditko and Stan Lee omnibus. The same goes for this, along with the letters that are kept within it to immerse you into this world of The Amazing Spider-Man. The next book that I would want to show you is yet another one that I don't have a physical copy of because I recently sold it. And yeah, that might sound weird, selling off something that would be here in the top 10, but it's just because it recently got a hardcover edition announced, so I'm waiting for that to show up. And that is the Chip Zdarsky Spider-Man Life Story hardcover, or whatever it's gonna be. Spider-Man A Life Story is awesome. If you have read a lot of Spider-Man content, I think you would appreciate it more, and I have. So it quickly jumps up to the top 10 just because you get so much nostalgia working into it just in 6 issues. And it takes on Spider-Man as it's sort of a linear story, I guess, because it takes place starting off in the 1967 somewhere, so it has been Spider-Man for a few years, and then they jump a decade for each and every issue, and yeah, it just shows the life story of Peter Parker. And I know they wanted to make the story longer, maybe 12 issues, so it could have 2 issues per decade, but I still think he nailed most of it. I mean, it didn't feel rushed. I think the issues were longer than usual with some extra pages. At least it felt like I got a lot of writing out of it and a nice perspective on how would it be if Peter Parker was Spider-Man from 1960 all up to the modern 21st century. And so I felt that I had a lot of value out of that story because of my reading marathon with Spider-Man and knowing pretty much all of the references that it had within the story of Spider-Man Life Story. And that is why it's in the top 10. And next, we are leaving the 616 universe just to jump into the Ultimate Spider-Man line. And first up is, of course, the volume number 1 by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley, Ultimate Spider-Man. This was amazing. The first time I read it, it was amazing, which is kind of funny using that word, this being Ultimate Spider-Man, but you know what I mean. The artwork by Mark Bagley is awesome. I love clean lines and just the color work pops and feels so modern, and it should, because they revamped Ultimate Spider-Man or Spider-Man by starting this up by the turn of the century, and I mean most of the things here still works. They sort of updated a lot of things, being modern take on Spider-Man. Maybe this isn't modern at all, maybe, but I still like it, and I think it's much more contained than the 616 universe timeline is, because it spins out into so many titles. The Spectacular Spider-Man, Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, and so on and so forth. Clone Saga. I mean, this feels so much more linear and contained and much more approachable in that way. And that is what the Ultimate Universe was supposed to be, more approachable for new readers. And this definitely was. I'm not afraid to say it, I love Brian Michael Bendis' writing. I think his dialogues are great. How many word bubbles you see whenever you open up a spread page and there's maybe half a page is word bubbles, doesn't scare me at all because I know it's good, fluent content. You read through it like watching a TV show. I say that every time I think about it, but that's how I feel. So there's no denying why this is in my top 10. Just really good story. And then second to last, yes, we're still in the Ultimate Universe, and this is another character, which is of course Miles Morales, Ultimate Spider-Man. And this one does so much right. I mean, of course, using the fact that anyone could be under this full-on bodysuit, excellent, and Miles is just so likable, and his suit, dare I say, looks cooler than the original Amazing Spider-Man design, because it does. Then of course we get new iterations of villains and characters, just like they reintroduced villains in the Ultimate Universe. This one just keeps on giving with that. We have a new, more behemoth kind of Venom, and we get Prowler and Mysterio and some other characters as well. Shouldn't spoil all the villains that shows up, I guess. But I just really like this, where he takes this universe. I think this omnibus is much stronger than when they merge the 616 and the Ultimate Universe, because here we still get Miles to stand on his own and not being a sort of apprentice to the 616 version. But yeah, there's no doubt why this is in the top 10. This is a great example of what Brian Michael Bendis can do with a character. Before I show you this last book, I would just like to please ask you to subscribe and check out the content on this channel. And there's lots more than just top 10 videos. We have some collection videos and room tours, and whenever things go back to the new normal, really hope to visit Comic-Con and give you new material from that. But I also do videos about minimalist collecting. Yeah, I know, it's kind of weird being a comic book collector and minimalism. But what I try to do with some of my videos is show you that it actually works in some way or form. And yeah, that's what you can find on my channel. And now, spoiler warning, this title itself is a spoiler for what is going to happen in the Ultimate Spider-Man universe, in between the Peter Parker run and the Miles Morales run. So know that this last book is a spoiler in the title itself. And now for all you brave souls that still are watching, this one is the Ultimate Spider-Man, The Death of Spider-Man. And why I have this on the top 10 is just because it hits the feels. Finally, I've read this like 3 times now, and I would say that the first 2 times it didn't actually get me, because I read it not in a linear format of from issue number 1 up to this point. The first time I read it just on its own, and the second time I think I reread it just after a few of the hardcovers had been achieved to my collection. But reading it from the very start to the very end, that one finally got me. And I just love having an emotional reaction to what I read, because then I know that it's really special and it's worth a reread. And having reread this 3 times, that was already a no-brainer for me, but still, I just love having feelings for my books, because it makes it so much more worth to have them in my collection. It's just a great example of how you actually could end a character's storyline, because I don't think I've ever read a Batman story where Batman actually dies. Not really. I guess there are some examples out there. Please tell me if you have some. And yeah, that is my last book. That is my last book in my top 10 Spider-Man books. So that's it. That's my last top 10 video that I have for now, because I haven't figured out any other top 10 lists to do, and I still want to make more videos on the comic book routine and comic book habits and all of that I do with this channel now. And yeah, just trying to spread awareness that there's other ways of how you can collect within this hobby. It's not just about accumulating a lot of books. It's also important to read your books. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope to see you in another one. Bye bye.
I had a feeling you'd come back and save me from all those lonely